The transport ship broke through the thick gray clouds of New Montana like a knife cutting through dirty cloth. Ambassador Zixthara pressed his 6 clawed hands against the viewing board and watched the planet surface grow larger below him. His black eyes reflected the lightning that danced between the storm clouds. This world looked angry and mean. Zixthara stood 8 feet tall on his 4 insect legs. His body was covered in hard crystal plates that shone blue and green in the ship's lights. He was a Velhari, one of the most advanced species in the galaxy. His people lived on beautiful worlds with perfect weather and endless peace. They had joined the Galactic Council 3,000 years ago and now helped decide which new species could join their group. The humans had asked to join the council 6 months ago. Most council members laughed at the idea. Humans were young and lived on terrible worlds that would kill most civilized beings in hours. But the council had rules. Every species got a fair chance. That was why Zixthara was here. The ship shook as it hit another air pocket. Through the window, Zixthara could see the human settlement below. It looked small and weak against the harsh landscape. Gray metal buildings huddled together like frightened animals. Smoke rose from tall stacks. The ground around the settlement was red and cracked. In the distance, tall mountains spit fire into the sky. This was a death world. Zixthara had read the reports. The air was thin and full of poison gases. The weather changed from freezing cold to burning hot in minutes. Acid rain fell almost every day. The ground shook constantly from earthquakes. Wild animals with razor teeth and poison claws hunted in packs. Most council species would need full body suits and armed guards just to step outside their ships. Yet humans lived here. They had built homes and farms. They raised families. Zixthara did not understand how or why they would choose such suffering. The ship landed with a heavy thud on the metal platform. Steam rose from the hot ground where the engines had touched down. Zixthara checked his breathing mask one more time and walked toward the exit ramp. His assistant, a small blue creature named Clicks, followed behind him carrying recording equipment. Ramp lowered with a hiss. Hot, bitter air rushed into the ship. Even through his breathing mask, Zixthara could taste the chemicals in the atmosphere. His crystal plates clicked together as he shivered from the sudden temperature change. 2 humans waited at the bottom of the ramp. The first was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He wore simple brown clothes and heavy boots. The second was a woman with short black hair and quick movements. She held a tablet computer in her hands. "Ambassador Zixthara," the man said, with a slight bow. "I am Jake Morrison, Colony Administrator. This is Lisa Chun, my deputy. Welcome to New Montana." Zixthara looked around the landing platform. The metal was already starting to rust from the acid in the air. Warning lights flashed red along the edges where the platform met the toxic soil. In the distance, he could hear the howls of native predators and the rumble of volcanic activity. "Your world attempts to kill visitors before they can properly greet their hosts," Zixthara observed. His voice came out through a translation device that made it sound flat and emotionless. Jake smiled, but his eyes looked sad. "New Montana can be challenging for those not used to it. We have prepared safe transportation to the main settlement." They climbed into a heavy vehicle with thick metal walls and small windows. The engine made loud grinding noises as they drove across the rough ground. Zixthara watched through the bulletproof glass as they passed warning signs about radiation, toxic gas pockets, and dangerous wildlife areas. "How long have humans lived on this world?" Zixthara asked. 15 years, Lisa replied. "We were the third colony ship to arrive. The first 2 groups found better worlds and moved on. We stayed. Why?" Jake and Lisa looked at each other. There was something in their expressions that Zixthara could not read. New Montana has valuable minerals, Jake said finally. And sometimes the best opportunities come in the most difficult packages. The vehicle climbed a steep hill, and suddenly the main settlement came into view. Zixthara had expected to see a desperate collection of emergency shelters and survival domes. Instead, he found himself looking at what appeared to be a real town. The buildings were solid and well built. Gardens grew in protected areas between the structures. Children played in a central courtyard, while adults worked at various tasks around the settlement. Smoke rose from chimneys, and lights glowed in windows. It looked almost normal, except for the massive defense walls and the gun towers at each corner. Your people live as if this world were not actively trying to destroy them, Zixthara noted with some confusion. Life goes on, Lisa said simply. People need homes and families, and communities, no matter where they live. They drove through the main gate and parked near a large building in the center of town. Zixthara climbed out of the vehicle and immediately noticed several things that troubled him. The air here was slightly cleaner due to some kind of filtration system, but it still burned his throat. The ground vibrated constantly from seismic activity, and there was a strange smell in the air, like metal and electricity and something organic he could not identify. But the humans walking around the settlement seemed completely unbothered by these conditions. They went about their daily business, as if living on a death world was the most natural thing in the galaxy. Children ran between the buildings without protective gear. Adults worked in the gardens with their bare hands in soil that Zixthara's instruments told him was mildly radioactive. "We will show you our agricultural facilities first," Jake said as he led the way toward a large dome structure. Then manufacturing, education, and residential areas. For the next 6 hours, Zixthara toured the human settlement. He saw there farms growing food in poisonous soil. He watched their factories making tools and equipment from raw materials that would be considered hazardous waste on most worlds. He visited their school where children learned mathematics and literature, while sitting in classrooms that shook from constant earthquakes. Everything he saw confirmed his initial assessment. Humans were a weak species that had somehow managed to survive in conditions that proper civilizations would never tolerate. They spent enormous amounts of energy and resources just staying alive. They had no time or materials left over for true advancement or culture. As the day ended and the acid rain began to fall, Zixthara stood in his guest quarters, writing his preliminary report. Through the small window, he could see the human settlement, hunkering down for another night of survival against their hostile environment. These people were not council material. They were too busy fighting their world to contribute anything meaningful to galactic civilization. Tomorrow he would complete his formal evaluation, but his mind was already made up. Humanity was weak, desperate, and unsuitable for membership in the Galactic Council. Zixthara woke to a sound he had never heard before. The noise came through the thick walls of his guest quarters and pulled him from sleep like a gentle hand. He sat up on his sleeping platform and tilted his head to listen better. The sound was musical, but not like any music he knew. It rose and fell in patterns that seemed random yet somehow perfect. His translation device could not identify it. The sound came in short bursts followed by longer flowing sections. Sometimes multiple voices joined together. Sometimes just one voice carried the melody alone. Curiosity overcame his usual careful nature. Zixthara checked his breathing equipment and stepped outside his quarters. The morning air was cleaner than yesterday, though still harsh by galactic standards. The strange sound was louder now and seemed to come from the central courtyard of the settlement. He walked carefully between the human buildings, staying close to the walls. His 4 legs moved silently across the metal walkways. As he got closer to the source of the sound, He began to make out individual voices within the larger pattern dot at the edge of the courtyard. Zixthara stopped and stared. What he saw challenged everything he thought he knew about human behavior under stress. 8 human children played in the open space between buildings. They ranged in age from perhaps 5 to 10 years old by his estimate. They wore simple clothes and no protective equipment despite the toxic environment. And they were making the sound he had heard. They were laughing. A boy with red hair and freckles ran between supply crates stacked around the courtyard. He moved with quick energy, dodging around obstacles while other children tried to catch him. This appeared to be some kind of chase game. When the other children got close, the red-haired boy would leap onto a crate or duck under a walkway, always staying just out of reach. The laughter came when someone made a particularly clever move, or when the boy was finally caught. Then a new child would become the one being chased, and the game would start again. Zixthara watched a small girl with dark skin and bright eyes climb onto a stack of metal boxes. She balanced easily on the narrow surface while calling out encouragement to the other children below. When a light tremor shook the ground, she simply adjusted her stance and kept playing. The earthquake that would send most civilized beings running for shelter was nothing more than a minor distraction to her. A boy with blonde hair noticed that the morning drizzle had started. The precipitation was mildly acidic. Zixthara knew from his readings it would cause painful burns to most species if left on exposed skin for more than a few minutes. But this child simply pulled up his hood and continued playing. The other children did the same. None of them seemed concerned about the dangerous rain. First time seeing human children at play? Zixthara spun around, his crystal plates clicking in alarm. A human woman stood behind him. She was middle-aged with short brown hair and kind eyes. She wore a white coat over practical work clothes. I'm Dr. Patricia Wells," she said with a smile, "xenobiologist for the colony. You must be Ambassador Zixthara." "These juveniles appear untroubled by the hostile conditions," Zixthara said, turning back to watch the children. "This seems inconsistent with expected stress responses." Patricia moved to stand beside him. She watched the children with obvious affection. That is because to them, this is not hostile. This is home. One of the children, a girl with long brown hair, had found a small puddle of rainwater. Instead of avoiding the acidic liquid, she was using a stick to make patterns in it. The other children gathered around to watch her create swirling designs in the dangerous water. "Do they not understand the risks?" Zixthara asked. "Oh, they understand perfectly," Patricia replied. "Kevin there knows that the rain will burn his skin if he stays out too long. Amy knows which puddles are safe to touch and which ones are not. Little Carlos can identify the warning signs of a major earthquake from the way the ground feels under his feet." She pointed to each child as she spoke. "Matt knows the difference between the howl of a razor cat and the call of a windsinger. Sophie can predict weather changes by watching the color of the clouds. They have more survival knowledge than most adult civilians from other worlds." Zixthara watched more carefully now. The children were not just playing randomly. They avoided certain areas of the courtyard where his instruments detected higher radiation levels. When the ground shook again, they automatically moved away from the tall stacks of supplies. When a warning siren sounded in the distance, they all looked toward the sound and then went back to their game, having determined it was not meant for them. "They have adapted to lethal conditions," he observed. "No," Patricia said gently. "They were born into these conditions. This is normal for them. The sound you hear, that laughter, that is the sound of human children being happy and healthy. And safe." "Safe," Zixthara repeated the word as if it made no sense. A new child joined the group in the courtyard. This one was very small, perhaps only 4 years old. She had curly red hair and moved with the unsteady steps of very young humans. The older children immediately changed their game to include her, making it gentler and slower so she could participate. She stumbled and fell on the hard ground. Zixthara expected tears and distress. Instead, the little girl picked herself up, brushed the dust from her clothes, and laughed. The other children laughed with her, not in mockery, but in shared joy. "Your species finds amusement in physical harm?" Zixthara asked, confused. "Children fall down," Patricia explained. "It is part of learning to walk and run and play. Human children are remarkably durable. They heal quickly and learn from their mistakes. That little girl will be more careful next time, but she will not stop playing." As if to prove the point, the small girl immediately ran back into the game. She moved more carefully now, but with no less enthusiasm. The morning progressed, and Zixthara found himself unable to look away from the children. They created games out of everything around them. Empty containers became forts to defend. Loose cables became ropes for jumping. Even the warning lights on the buildings became part of their play as they created rules about which colors meant safe and which meant danger. When a pack of small scavenger animals wandered into the courtyard, Zixthara tensed. The creatures were only knee-high to an adult human, but they had sharp teeth and were known to attack in groups when hungry. He was about to call out a warning when he saw how the children reacted. They did not run or hide. Instead, they stood still and made themselves look bigger by raising their arms. The oldest boy, Kevin, made a sharp whistling sound. The scavengers looked at the children, decided they were not easy prey, and wandered away to find food elsewhere. They know the behavior patterns of local wildlife, Patricia noted. We teach survival skills as early as we teach reading and basic math. By age 6, most children here know more about staying alive in dangerous conditions than military specialists. From other worlds, the children went back to their games as if nothing had happened. The brief encounter with potentially dangerous predators was just another part of their normal day. Zixthara began to understand that he was not watching children struggling to survive on a death world. He was watching children who belonged to this death world, who had made it their own through adaptation and knowledge and fearless joy. As the morning rain grew heavier, the children finally moved under the covered walkways. But they did not go inside. Instead, they pressed their faces against the transparent barriers and watched the acid rain create colorful patterns as it reacted with different metals and surfaces. "Pretty," the smallest girl said, pointing at the chemical light show outside. "Very pretty, Maria," agreed the older girl with brown hair. They were finding beauty in something that would terrify most galactic citizens. They were laughing at a world that was trying to kill them. For the first time since arriving on New Montana, Zixthara began to wonder if he had misunderstood something important about humanity. Zixthara spent the rest of the morning watching the human children from different hiding spots around the settlement. What he saw continued to puzzle him. These young beings seemed to treat their deadly environment like a playground. When Jake Morrison found him observing from behind a water recycling unit, the colony administrator did not seem surprised. "Interesting in seeing more of how our children live," Jake asked. "I require additional data to complete my evaluation," Zixthara replied formally, but the truth was simpler. He needed to understand what he was seeing. "Would you like to observe their daily education session?" Jake offered. "Ben Carter is taking them on a nature walk this afternoon." Zixthara agreed, though he wondered how humans could call anything on this hostile world a nature walk. On his home planet of Velarari Prime, nature walks involved gentle paths through flower gardens and peaceful streams. Here, nature seemed designed to kill anything that ventured outside protective barriers. After the midday meal, 12 children gathered in the courtyard. They ranged in age from 6 to 10 years old. Each child carried a small pack and wore sturdy boots, but none had any serious protective equipment. Their teacher, Ben Carter, was a stocky man with graying hair and scars on his hands that spoke of hard experience. "All right, kids," Ben said in a voice that was both gentle and firm. "Today we are going to practice identifying safe plants and finding emergency shelter. Everyone remember the 3 rules? Stay together, stay alert, stay calm," the children recited in unison. "Good. Let's go." The group walked toward the main gate of the settlement. Zixthara followed at a distance, along with Jake Morrison and Dr. Patricia Wells. His breathing equipment worked harder as they moved into the unfiltered outside air dot beyond the settlement walls. The landscape was even more hostile than Zixthara had imagined. The ground was cracked and uneven, with pools of bubbling liquid that gave off toxic steam. Strange plants grew in twisted shapes, their leaves sharp enough to cut, and their flowers bright colors that warned of poison. In the distance, the calls of predators echoed between the rocky hills. The children walked into this nightmare landscape as if they were strolling through a peaceful park. "Emma, what can you tell me about those berries?" Ben asked, pointing to a bush with dark purple fruit. A 9-year-old girl with blonde pigtails stepped forward. She studied the plant carefully without touching it. "Purple berries with white spots are safe to eat," she said, "but only the ones that grow in clusters of 3 or more. Single berries or pears are usually poisonous." "Very good. Tyler, show me how you would signal for help if you got separated from the group." A small boy with dark hair pulled out a medal. Whistle and blew 3 short blasts followed by 2 long ones. The sound echoed off the rocky walls around them. 3 short, 2 long. Wait 10 seconds, then repeat, he said. Ben nodded approvingly. "And if your whistle breaks?" Tyler pointed to a pile of loose rocks. "Stack 3 stones in a triangle pointing toward the settlement. That tells rescue teams which direction I was trying to go." As they walked deeper into the wasteland, Zixthara noticed that the children moved with careful awareness. They watched where they stepped, avoided areas where the ground looked unstable, and gave wide clearance to plants that might be dangerous. But they did not seem afraid. If anything, they appeared curious and engaged. A low rumbling sound came from behind a cluster of boulders ahead. Ben held up his hand, and the children immediately stopped and became quiet. Zixthara felt his crystal plates tighten with fear. That sound meant predators. 6 creatures emerged from behind the rocks. They were about the size of large dogs, but built like reptiles, with scales that shifted color to match their surroundings, and rows of sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh. Zixthara had read about these in the planetary survey reports. They were called razorbacks, and they hunted in packs. The ambassador expected the humans to retreat or call for help. Instead, 10-year-old Hannah Clark stepped forward and clapped her hands loudly 3 times. The razorbacks stopped advancing. They looked at the small human girl with what appeared to be uncertainty. Hannah clapped again, louder this time. "Go on, get out of here," she said in a firm voice. "We are not food." The predators looked at each other, then at the group of humans. After a moment that felt like an eternity to Zixthara, they turned and sloped away into the rocks. "Well done, Hannah," Ben said calmly. "Who can tell me why that worked?" A boy named Danny raised his hand. "Razorbacks are ambush hunters. They do not like prey that sees them coming and acts confident." "Exactly. And what would we do if clapping did not work?" "Back away slowly while making noise," several children answered at once. "Never run unless they charge first." Zixthara stared at these human youngsters, who had just faced down a pack of deadly predators without showing any sign of panic. On his world, encounters with dangerous wildlife required armed guards and emergency medical teams. These children handled it like a routine homework assignment. The group continued their walk. The children practiced identifying edible plants, finding sources of clean water, and recognizing signs of unstable ground. They did all of this while chatting and laughing and behaving like normal young beings on an educational outing. When they encountered a small cave that might provide shelter from acid rain, 7-year-old Maria Santos volunteered to check if it was safe. She approached the opening carefully, threw a small stone inside to make noise, then listened for any sounds that might indicate dangerous animals were living there. "Empty," she announced. "But it smells like sulfur, so the air might be bad." Ben praised her caution. "Good thinking, Maria. What else should we check?" "Look for recent animal tracks," said Carlos Martinez, age 8. "Check if the ceiling looks stable. Make sure there is another way out in case the entrance gets blocked." These children, some barely old enough to tie their own shoes, were demonstrating survival skills that would challenge experienced adults from most civilized worlds. And they were doing it while smiling and helping each other, and treating the whole experience as an interesting adventure. As they started back toward the settlement, Zixthara noticed something that stopped him in his tracks. Little Maria Santos had fallen behind the group slightly, and she was struggling with the thin atmosphere. Her breathing was labored, and her small face was flushed. Without being asked, she pulled a small device from her pack and pressed it to her mouth. It was a portable oxygen supplement, designed to help with breathing in low-oxygen environments. She used it as naturally as other children might drink water. But then she noticed Zixthara watching her. The ambassador was also struggling with the atmosphere, his own breathing equipment working hard to keep him supplied with clean air. "You look tired, Mr. Bugman," Maria said with innocent kindness. She held out her oxygen device. "Want to share my air?" The gesture was so unexpected, so purely generous, that Zixthara found himself unable to speak for several seconds. This small human child, barely 7 years old, was offering to share her life support equipment with a complete stranger who represented a government that might reject her entire species. "I have adequate breathing apparatus," he managed to say. "Okay," Maria smiled and caught up with the rest of the group. "But if you change your mind, just ask." As they walked back through the settlement gates, Zixthara found his certainty about human weakness crumbling. These children were not struggling to survive on a death world. They were thriving on it. They had adapted to conditions that would kill most galactic citizens, and they had done it without losing their curiosity, their kindness, or their joy. That evening, as he sat in his quarters writing his daily report, Zixthara found himself struggling to find the right words. Everything he had observed challenged his assumptions about humanity and about survival itself. Outside his window, he could hear the children playing again, their laughter mixing with the sounds of another acid rainstorm beginning to fall. Zixthara found Jake Morrison in his office that evening, reviewing supply reports by the light of chemical lamps. The colony administrator looked up as the ambassador entered, unsurprised by the late visit. "Your offspring adapt to lethal conditions." As if they were merely inconvenient, Zixthara said without preamble. "This should not be possible, according to standard developmental biology." Jake leaned back in his chair and studied the tall alien visitor. "Ambassador, can I ask you something? What kind of world was your species born on?" The question caught Zixthara off guard. In all his diplomatic training, no one had ever asked him to describe his home world, to explain his people. "Valhari Prime is a paradise," he began, his voice taking on a tone of pride. "Perfect atmospheric composition, stable climate patterns, abundant fresh water, and fertile soil. The average temperature varies only 15 degrees throughout the entire year. We have no dangerous predators, no toxic plants, no natural disasters." He paused, remembering the beauty of his home. "The most dangerous thing a Valhari child might encounter is a berry bush with thorns, and even those thorns are not sharp enough to cause serious injury. Jake nodded thoughtfully. That sounds wonderful. Peaceful, safe. It is everything a civilized world should be, Zixthara agreed. We evolved intelligence to master our environment. We built cities, developed technology, created art and literature. We had time to think and grow and become wise because we did not have to spend all our energy simply staying alive. We evolved intelligence to survive our environment, Jake countered quietly. Every human world is what you would call a death world. We do not have paradise planets in our territory because honestly, we cannot survive on them. This statement made no sense to Zixthara. Cannot survive on paradise worlds? That is impossible. Jake activated a holographic display unit on his desk. Images began to appear in the air between them. Let me show you some other human colonies. The first image showed a world covered in ice and snow. Children in heavy coats were sliding down. Steep slopes on pieces of metal, laughing as they dodged between jets of superheated steam erupting from the ground. New Sol, Jake explained, built on a world with constant seismic activity. The average temperature is 20 degrees below freezing, and volcanic vents can open anywhere without warning. The children there learn to ski between the lava flows. For fun. The next image showed a desert world under an angry red sun. Human children played in the sand while wearing special suits, timing their games to avoid the worst radiation storms. Port Elizabeth. High radiation levels that would cook most species in hours. Our kids play games that involve timing their runs between radioactive storms. They think it is exciting. Another image appeared. This one showed children on what looked like a normal grassy field, except the grass was moving like ocean waves. And the sky was full of spinning cloud formations. New Dublin. The weather there has its own personality. Storms that can think and hunt. The atmospheric pressure changes so fast it can crush unprepared beings. Children there learn to read weather patterns like other species read simple picture books. Image after image appeared. Human children living, playing, and thriving on worlds that the Galactic Council had classified as uninhabitable. Toxic atmospheres, crushing gravity, deadly radiation, predators that could tear through metal, plants that could dissolve flesh with their touch. But why? Zixthara asked, bewildered. Why choose such suffering when easier worlds exist? Jake smiled sadly. Because those are not our worlds, Ambassador. Humans evolved on Earth, which by galactic standards is already a death world. Heavy. Gravity, violent weather, aggressive wildlife, diseases that can kill in days. What you call paradise worlds, we call boring. He pulled up one more image. This one showed human children on a world that looked perfect. Green grass, blue sky, gentle sunshine, peaceful streams. But the children in the image looked listless and unhappy. Some were sitting alone, staring at nothing. Others were fighting with each other for no apparent reason. This was our attempt at colonizing a paradise world, Jake explained. Perfect conditions, no dangers, abundant resources. The adults did fine for a while, but the children, he shook his head. They got depressed. They started acting out. Some got sick for no medical reason. We had to evacuate after 2 years. I do not understand. Human children need challenges. Ambassador. They need problems to solve and dangers to overcome. Take away all the risks, and they create their own problems. Usually worse ones. Jake stood and walked to the window. Outside, despite the late hour and the acid rain, Zixthara could see human children playing under the covered walkways, their laughter audible even through the thick glass. You called us weak, Jake continued, but weakness is relative. Your people might be stronger in paradise. Our children laugh on worlds that would terrify your warriors. Zixthara thought about this. On Velhari Prime, Children were kept in protected environments until they reached adulthood. They learned in safe classrooms with soft walls and gentle teachers. They played in carefully designed spaces where nothing could hurt them. They were not allowed to face any real challenges until they were fully mature and ready. "Do your children ever fail?" he asked. "All the time," Jake replied. "That is how they learn. Maria will probably get a small burn from acid rain at some point, despite all her training. Kevin will likely get chased up a tree by a razorback eventually. Emma might eat the wrong berry and get a stomach ache. And you allow this? We prepare them for it. We teach them how to treat burns, how to climb safely when being chased, how to make themselves throw up if they eat something poisonous. Then we trust them to handle the consequences of their choices." Jake turned back to face the ambassador. "Your people are wise and peaceful and advanced. But could a Velhari child survive one day on New Montana?" Zixthara thought about the young ones on his home world. Protected, educated, careful beings who had never faced real danger or made decisions that could seriously hurt them. He imagined them in the settlement courtyard, trying to play while acid rain fell and the ground shook, and predators howled in the distance. They would be dead in hours. "Our children survive because they must," Jake continued. "Yours survive because they never have to. Both approaches work, but they create very different kinds of adults." "What kind of adults do human children become?" Zixthara asked. Jake smiled. "The kind who look at a galaxy full of impossible worlds and see new homes. The kind who volunteer to explore places where no one has ever survived. The kind who laugh at danger and find ways to make friends with things that want to eat them." Through the window, Zixthara watched a group of human children who had noticed him observing them. Instead of running away from this strange alien visitor, they waved and made faces against the glass, trying to make him laugh. When he lifted one hand in an awkward wave back, they cheered and did little dances of celebration. "They are not afraid of me," he observed. "Should they be? Most young beings are cautious around unfamiliar species. Human children assume everyone wants to be their friend until proven otherwise," Jake explained. "It is not always smart, but it means they grow up expecting the universe to be full of interesting people instead of dangerous strangers." That night, Zixthara lay on his sleeping platform staring at the ceiling. Everything Jake had shown him challenged the basic assumptions of galactic civilization. The Galactic Council was built on the idea that intelligence arose from peace and safety. Species developed technology and culture when they no longer had to worry about survival. But humans seem to have developed intelligence because of danger, not in spite of it. They had become advanced while still living on worlds that actively tried to kill them. Their children grew up stronger and more capable, precisely because they faced real risks every day. For the first time since beginning his evaluation, Zixthara began to wonder if the Galactic Council might need humanity more than humanity needed the Council. Outside his window, the sounds of the settlement continued through the night. Adults working late shifts to maintain the equipment that kept them all alive. Security teams checking the perimeter for predator intrusions. And somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of children who had convinced their parents to let them camp outside, telling stories under the stars while acid rain drummed against their shelter roof. They were not just surviving on this death world. They were making it home. On his final day at New Montana, Zixthara woke to the sound of emergency sirens. His first thought was that the settlement was under attack. He quickly checked his breathing equipment and hurried outside to offer whatever assistance he could provide. What he found was not panic, but preparation. A massive storm was approaching from the eastern mountains. The sky had turned an ominous green color, and lightning flashed between clouds that seemed to move with deliberate purpose. Weather monitoring equipment around the settlement showed readings that would require immediate evacuation on most civilized worlds. This was a Category 5 atmospheric disturbance. On Velhari Prime, such a storm would be considered a planetary emergency. Emergency services would evacuate entire cities. Military units would take shelter in underground bunkers. No sane being would remain exposed to such devastating weather. But the humans of New Montana were not evacuating. Adults moved through the settlement, securing equipment and checking structural supports. They worked with the calm efficiency of people who had done this many times before. Children helped carry supplies and close protective barriers, treating the approaching storm as just another part of life. Zixthara found himself drawn toward the community center, where he could hear voices and activity. Inside, he discovered something that would forever change his understanding of human nature. The large central room had been converted into a storm-watching area. Massive transparent barriers had been installed along one wall, designed to withstand the impact of debris, while allowing clear views outside. Comfortable seating was arranged in rows facing the barriers, and filling those seats were the children of New Montana. They were excited. 9-year-old Rebecca Turner sat in the front row with her younger brother Noah, pointing at the approaching storm clouds and explaining what they were seeing. The purple lightning means there is metal in the clouds, she told him with the casual expertise of a trained meteorologist. That is why we cannot go outside, but we can watch the pretty colors. Other children clustered around them, sharing snacks and blankets while they waited for the storm to arrive. They chattered about previous storms they had witnessed, comparing the colors of different types of lightning and making bets about how strong the winds would get. Zixthara stood at the back of the room, stunned. These children were not afraid of the approaching disaster. They were treating it like entertainment. Dr. Patricia Wells noticed his confusion and moved to stand beside him. Storm watching is a popular activity here, she explained quietly. The children love to see the atmospheric displays. They learn meteorology by observing weather patterns firsthand. They should be terrified, Zixthara said. That storm could destroy the entire settlement. The settlement was built to survive much worse than this, Patricia replied. The children know they are safe inside. To them, this is just an exciting, natural phenomenon to observe and learn from. The first winds hit the building with a sound like a giant breathing. The children pressed closer to the transparent barriers, their faces bright with anticipation. When the first bolt of purple lightning struck nearby, illuminating the room with electric color, they cheered and clapped. "Look at that one," shouted 8-year-old Danny Martinez, pointing at a particularly bright flash. It bounced 3 times before it hit the ground. "That means the air pressure is really unstable," added 10-year-old Hannah Clark knowledgeably. "The lightning cannot find a straight path down." Zixthara watched in amazement as these human children discussed complex atmospheric physics while enjoying a storm that would send most galactic species underground for weeks. They were not just unafraid, they were fascinated. When large pieces of debris began hitting the protective barriers, the children became even more excited. They counted the impacts and tried to guess what objects were being thrown around outside. When a particularly large piece of metal struck the barrier with a thunderous crash, they cheered as if their favorite sports team had scored a victory. "Did you see that?" little Maria Santos called out, bouncing in her seat. "That was probably part of the old mining equipment from Sector 7. "How can you tell?" asked Carlos Martinez. "Because it was round and had those spiral marks on it," Maria explained. "Plus it came from the right direction." These children, some barely old enough to read, were calmly analyzing debris patterns during a catastrophic storm. They showed more scientific curiosity than fear, more excitement than concern. As the storm reached its peak intensity, the building shook from the force of the winds. Emergency lighting kicked in as the main power grid automatically shut down. To prevent damage, the children simply adjusted to the dimmer light and continued their observations. "The wind speed just hit 200 kilometers per hour," announced Rebecca Turner, reading numbers from a display panel near the barriers. "That is a new record for this season." "Cool," said several other children at once. Zixthara found himself sitting down heavily in one of the empty chairs, overwhelmed by what he was witnessing. This storm that would qualify as a planetary emergency on most worlds was, to human children, an exciting educational opportunity. When the storm began to pass and normal lighting returned, the children started comparing notes about what they had observed. They drew pictures of lightning patterns and discussed wind speed measurements like other young beings might talk about toys or games. "That was awesome," declared Noah Turner. "Can we stay for the next one too?" "If you finish your homework and help with storm cleanup tomorrow," his sister Rebecca replied in a tone that suggested she was often responsible for her younger brother Dot, as the children began to file out of the community center, chattering about the storm and already looking forward to the next one. Zixthara remained seated. The implications of what he had witnessed were staggering. These human children had just experienced something that would traumatize the young of most species. They had faced natural forces capable of destroying cities and ending lives. And they had found it entertaining, more than entertaining. They had found it beautiful. That evening, Zixthara returned to his ship to compile his final report. His assistant Clix waited nervously, expecting the negative assessment they had both anticipated after viewing this harsh world and its struggling inhabitants. Instead, Zixthara began to write something very different. Species assessment, Homo sapiens. Initial classification of weak was fundamentally incorrect. Humans do not inhabit death worlds out of desperation. They inhabit them by preference. Their juvenile members display adaptation capabilities that exceed the survival skills of most adult council species. He paused, thinking of Maria Santos offering to share her oxygen, of Hannah Clark facing down predators with nothing but confidence, of children shearing at storms that would silence the songs of empires. They exhibit pack bonding behaviors that extend even to potentially hostile observers. They demonstrate joy in circumstances that would induce terror in more civilized beings. They find beauty in forces that destroy. They laugh at dangers that would send our warriors fleeing. Zixthara thought of his own childhood on peaceful Velhari Prime, safe and protected and utterly unprepared for real challenges. Then he thought of human children learning to navigate deadly environments before they could properly walk, growing up strong and fearless, and endlessly curious about the universe around them. Recommendation: immediate acceptance into Galactic Council with cautionary note. Humans should not be underestimated. They are not weak because they struggle to survive. They are strong because they choose to thrive where others cannot even exist. Their children laugh in conditions that would silence the songs of empires. He finished his report with a personal observation that would be quoted in diplomatic circles for generations to come. "I have observed the future of galactic civilization, and it plays games in acid rain while making friends with apex predators. We should welcome humanity not as the weakest member of our council, but as perhaps the strongest. Any species whose children consider a death world to be a playground has already won evolutionary victory. We would be wise to learn from them, rather than dismiss them." As his ship prepared for departure the next morning, Zixthara looked down at New Montana one last time. In the settlement courtyard, human children were already outside again, playing in the puddles left by the previous night's storm and laughing at the beautiful colors the acid rain had created on the metal surfaces around them. He had come to evaluate whether humanity deserved a place among the civilized species of the galaxy. Instead, He had learned that perhaps the galaxy needed to redefine what civilization meant. The sound of children laughing on a death world would stay with him for the rest of his life.